Hi guys! Today I'm going to read to you an original fantastical fiction that I wrote entitled Juliette and the Precious Elements by yours truly, Vera Catalano. Juliette is a very brave, kind, and wonderful fairy leader guardian who loves adventures. She has blue eyes like sapphire and shiny brown hair. She likes playing fairy soccer with her best friend, Zelda. Juliette, Zelda, and the other fairies all lived in a sacred forest called the Fairy Valley Sparkles for thousands of years. It is an enchanted, gleaming land where it is always sunny and magical because it houses the precious elements in a sacred garden that keeps things in harmony. It is Juliette's role as the leader to protect the elements and their land from outside creatures who always want to steal the elements and destroy Fairy Valley Sparkles. It was a fine, peaceful day in Fairy Valley Sparkles. The birds were going chirp, 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 and the air was filled with the joyful laughter of fairies. Ha ha ha! And all the fairies were wondering, when is she gonna wake up? Whispered a fairy. Is she okay? Said another fairy with a worried expression on her face. Suddenly, she finally woke up. She clapped her tiny hands, clap, 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 and came out of her tiny sparkling house through her circle door with her beautiful blue sapphire eyes and her long, shiny brown hair. She is the fairy leader guardian of her hometown, and her name is Juliette. Juliette is known as the smart, kind, helpful fairy who is very brave and adventurous. She is the protector of Fairy Valley Sparkles against anything that wants to destroy it. Even if she's brave, she can be playful. She always hangs out with her best friend Zelda, and they would play fairy soccer together and have fun. All the fairies have lived in the sacred forest woods for thousands of years. It is a place where they work hard and enjoy the many wonderful gifts of nature in Fairy Valley Sparkles. Their land is gleaming with magic and is always so light and sunny because this place is enchanted with the power of their precious elements that keep things in balance and harmony. It offers a lot of adventures, magic, and fun. This is the reason why many creatures from the outside world have always tried to take it away from them. This is why the fairies chose Juliette to be the protector and guardian of their kingdom. One fine day, the fairies were doing their great spring cleaning tradition to prepare for the Grand Fairies Ball. The fairies love cleaning day because they get to gather and decorate Fairy Valley Sparkles for their most awaited ball, where the other fairies from different lands will come and visit. The fairies use their different magical powers to make Fairy Valley Sparkles more beautiful, and this brings smiles on their faces. Everyone was busy, especially Juliette, as she has a lot of responsibilities for the Grand Fairies Ball. Juliette flew to the sacred garden to check on the decorations. As soon as she reached the passage to the huge golden gate, she saw a very large footprint on the ground. The footprint was so big that one can be the size of a fairy lake. Juliette followed the large footprints. It was heading towards the very center of the sacred garden. Juliette felt very nervous. She can hear the beating of her chest so loud, and her face looked so disturbed. She had to check the elements and make sure that they were all safe. Juliette entered the sacred tree where their precious elements were stored. She smelled a strong, awful stench. Ew, what's that smell? It smells like a dead rat. Juliette dusts her nose with her wand, where it magically sprayed sweet perfume. As soon as Juliette felt better after smelling the awful stench, Juliette felt something very strange was about to happen, that it turned dark inside the precious elements tree. Juliette used her wand as a light and walked to see the elements shelves. Juliette's face turned all white with shock when she found out that all the precious elements were gone except for the earthstone element. Juliette screamed as loud as her tiny voice could go. Ah! Help! Fairies, emergency! Juliette cried. All the fairies heard Juliette's tiny, loud sound. They left their chores and they all flew to the sacred garden through the golden gate and entered the sacred tree. What happened? What's the matter, Juliette? They all asked. Our precious elements are gone. Someone stole it, and now that's all left is our earthstone element, Juliette sobbed. Everyone was very quiet. What do we do now, Your Highness Juliette? Asked one fairy. We gotta find out who stole our precious elements, Zelda said. We gotta bring them all back, replied Juliette. The fairies moved around to find clues. They smelled an awful stench near their precious elements shelves, and they saw large footprints as big as a fairy lake. They followed these footprints, and they saw a huge shadow moving very fast. Juliette led the fairies, and together they flew in an arrow form and followed the huge, fast-moving shadow. They swirled their wands to add more speed and catch the shadow, and it worked. They all saw a large, ugly giant hiding in his own shadow with all the stolen precious elements sparkling in his loot bag. It's the ugly giant! Screamed Juliette. Juliette's eyes were as hot as the sun. Grrr! She growled in anger. I knew the ugly giants would be up to something really bad. I knew it! Juliette tried using their precious earthstone to throw a beam of ray to stop the ugly giant. The beam hit the ugly giant in his shoulders. This made the ugly giant look up and notice that he's being followed by an army of fairies. He was surprised. He ran as fast as his big fat legs could with a loot bag of precious elements in his hands and headed up to the kingdom of the ugly giants. Juliette and her army of fairies followed the ugly giant and saw him enter a cave mountain that is the kingdom of the ugly giants. Just before they entered the ugly giant's cave mountain, Juliette raised her wand and signaled the fairies to gather and hide in a big old tree near a river. Guys, we need to plan our attack. We don't know what's inside that cave mountain, Juliette whispered. I agree. I think we need to split up, Zelda replied. Half of the fairies will go with me and enter the front of the cave mountain, and the other half will go with Zelda and enter the back of the cave mountain. Mimi Sprinkles, you are the youngest one, so stay with me. But we need you to dust us with your wand to make us invisible. We are too bright, like the sun, for the dark cave mountain. Those ugly giants will see us, Juliette said. The tiny Mimi Sprinkles stepped forward, took out her wand, and waved it around. Swish, swish, swish. Mimi Sprinkles' dusts made all the fairies invisible. They can only be seen by fairies like themselves. Thanks, Mimi Sprinkles. Now we're ready to attack, said Juliette. Juliette was very determined to defeat the giants and take all their precious elements back. She looked at the earthstone in her pocket and whispered a little prayer, and then she shouted, Let's do this and get back what's ours! Juliette and half of the fairies entered the front of the ugly giant's cave mountain. Inside it was so dark and scary, and it smelled so disgusting, no wonder the ugly giants stink. It was also very hot. The fairies felt like they were being burned. The fairies flew into the cave's hall and the darkness ended with a shining light. The walls were covered with millions of stones that made the hall sparkling and bright, and inside were thousands of ugly giants working, marching, and mining more stones. From there, Juliette saw the ugly giant with a loot bag of the precious stones in his hand. He was kneeling down and offering the loot bag of precious elements to the ugly giant's king, who was seated on his throne. Just as he was handing it to their king, Juliette raised her sword and slashed the loot bag. All the elements fell on the ground and made a beautiful sound. The fairies took all the elements quickly from the ground. The ugly giants were all confused that the precious elements disappeared, as the fairies were invisible. This made the ugly giant's king very angry. "Find those precious elements!" he screamed. Juliette was happy and proud that they got the elements back. But as soon as Juliette and the fairies were about to go out, the invisible powers from Mimi Sprinkles disappeared. The king shouted, "Get them!" The ugly giant's king screamed. Zelda and the other half of the fairies reached the hall too, and the great battle started. The fairies with their wands and the ugly giants with their axes and sticky green slimes and their machine guns. The ugly giants were too strong for the fairies' magic powers. A lot of the fairies were hurt from the sticky green slime machine gun. Juliette saw it, and she used her strength to save the fairies with her sword and the beam of earthstone, but she was no match for the ugly giant's weapons. The strongest giant saw what Juliette was doing. He caught Juliette and squeezed her in his large hand. He was about to stab Juliette in her heart with a knife. He said, "Any last words before you die?" Juliette replied, "You can never take our precious elements from us. You will never win." Juliette was so weak from being squeezed that the earthstone rolled out of her hand. Zelda caught the earthstone that rolled out from Juliette's hand, gathered the fairies with all the precious elements, and placed all the elements together like a puzzle. And just as all the 5 precious elements were combined, its powers shined and made an intense, strong ray of light that blew the entire cave mountain and melted all the ugly giants. The fairies cheered with joy that they had defeated the ugly giants, all thanks to the precious elements combined and to the quick thinking of Zelda. Juliette was still weak, but she tried to walk slowly to Zelda and hugged her. "Thank you so much, Zelda, for saving my life and for saving us all. You are my best friend," mumbled Juliette. "It's no biggie. You taught me how to do that. To combine all the precious elements so its powers can protect all of us from our enemies," replied Zelda. "Thank you for saving all of our fairy friends from the ugly giants, Juliette." "I'm sorry if we came a little bit late," sighed Zelda. "No, Zelda, don't be sorry. You came at the perfect time," said Juliette. The young Mimi Sprinkles and the boy Doc Sparkles waved their wands and magically healed the fairies that were hurt by the ugly giants. One by one, their wounds started to disappear. Doc Sparkles ran to Juliette and gave her a magic swish with his wand, and Juliette's weak body became strong again. "Thanks, Doc Sparkles and Mimi Sprinkles. You fixed us all," said Juliette. "You're welcome. That's my power. Thanks to my wand," Doc Sparkles replied. "Hooray! We defeated the ugly giants!" All the fairies cheered happily. Zelda said, "This calls for a party! We still have time to make our Grand Fairies Ball happen. Everyone, let's go and fly back to our home sweet home, our Fairy Valley Sparkles, and make our Grand Fairies Ball happen," shouted Juliette. The fairies formed a beautiful heart formation as they flew back to Fairy Valley Sparkles. They danced and sang their ritual songs while Juliette and Zelda placed all their precious elements safely back to its shelves in the sacred garden. The fairies all bowed to their brave leader Juliette, and Juliette bowed down to Zelda to show that she is grateful and happy that Zelda saved her life. The fairies were all happy that everyone was safe and that their precious elements were back in their home. The fairies continued to work together to prepare for their most awaited Grand Fairies Ball tomorrow. It was the day of the Grand Fairies Ball, and all of the fairies from different kingdoms came to Fairy Valley Sparkles. Everyone was amazed at how beautiful Fairy Valley Sparkles is. "It's so sparkly in here," said one fairy from Fairy Moon Kingdom. "It's like heaven in here," said another fairy from Fairy Well Kingdom. Everyone who came felt peaceful and very happy in their heart. All the fairies from all fairy kingdoms gathered around the sacred garden. Juliette went on top of the sacred tree and welcomed everyone. Before they started their traditional fairy dance, Juliette said, "Close your eyes and place your wands in your chest, and let's all sing our fairy hymn." All the fairies followed Juliette's, young and old, tall and short, fairies with all colors of the rainbow. They closed their eyes, placed their wands in their chest, and sang the most beautiful song you can ever hear. While they all sang their fairy hymn, the precious elements started to become alive. It floated from its shelves to the middle of the sacred garden where everyone gathered. The precious elements made a very strong light as bright as the sun. All fairies can see the brightness even when their eyes are closed. From the very strong light, the Lord of the Trees appeared before them. The Lord of the Trees is as tall as the Empire State Building, and nobody can see its face. They can only hear its very deep voice. "I promise that I, the Lord of the Trees, and all the trees in this universe, will protect all the fairies of all kingdoms, and will guard all the precious elements with our lives," said the Lord of the Trees. A golden branch appeared in Juliette's hand, and a golden crown of flowers appeared on her head. A golden necklace appeared on the neck of each fairy from Fairy Valley Sparkles. The Lord of the Trees said, "These are magical gifts from the Kingdom of Trees, to thank you for protecting all of our precious elements. These gifts will be our eyes and will summon us when there is danger. We will always protect you from this day on." The fairies heard a loud but peaceful humming of all the trees that surrounded them. This is their way to seal their promise of friendship to the fairies. All the fairies from all kingdoms cheered for the courage of the Fairy Valley Sparkle fairies. They all bowed down to Juliette to show respect for being a great fairy leader. "Raise your wands, everyone. It's time to party. Let the Grand Fairies Ball begin," declared Juliette. All the fairies and the trees continued to protect each other, and they all lived happily ever after. The end. And that is Juliette and the Precious Elements by Vera Catalano. Thanks for watching.